Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today I'm going to show you how to put together a low cost gaming PC with very little effort. Our budget PC build starts with the HP Z240 here. I got this one for £120. It was listed for a little more, but I made a cheeky offer, which is always worth trying, and the seller accepted. It features a Core i7 7700, 16GB of DDR4 and a 512GB M.2 SSD with extra slots and drive bays for further upgrades. It's also in fairly decent condition with just a few marks here and there. I really like the look of these, a simple and sleek design that will look good atop any desk or underneath it. I've seen people give these custom white paint jobs too, which can look good, but personally the all black exterior is perfect as it is. This machine was also pretty clean on the inside as expected from the photos. Always look out for listings with plenty of pictures and detailed descriptions. I'm not too familiar with these, so I thought the SSD was missing at first, but I realised it was hidden down at the bottom with a heatsink on top. More to my surprise, Windows 10 Pro was pre-installed as well. The included graphics card was a Quadro K2200. It's okay for older games, I tested it the other day and it's very low power. That said, it's not the GPU we're sticking with today. In fact, I already sold it on eBay for £20 at the time of this upload, or £19.10 after fees. eBay were doing an 80% off fees weekend. Always look out for those offers if you plan on selling some stuff. This brought the total expenditure so far down to just £100.90. Now comes the difficult part. These HP machines are quite restrictive in that we have just one 6-pin power connector for a graphics card. That's fine if you want to add something older, but most newer GPUs require a single 8-pin at minimum. We could use an adapter, which always seems a bit dodgy, and you might be thinking, well, just replace the PSU. See, the Z240 has proprietary power connectors, meaning that we'd need to buy a 24-pin adapter as well as a new PSU. I've done that before, but this build is all about keeping things simple and relatively low cost. We also have a 7th gen i7 in here, and I don't mean to disrespect the quad-core legend, but a lot of modern mid-range or high-end cards will be held back when paired with it. With all this in mind, I decided to go for one of these. It's the 6GB RTX 3050. It's probably one of, if not the best card you can buy that doesn't require a power connector, and unlike the RX 6400 for example, the 3050's performance won't be absolutely decimated by the PCIe 3.0 interface of this machine. It's not without its controversies. It's more than a VRAM limited version of the standard 8GB 3050, it's cut down elsewhere too. That said, this is the perfect use case for it. We can stick it in this thing and it'll work with the stock 400W 80 Plus Platinum PSU without issues and without the need for any adapters. At £150 it's perhaps a tad expensive. I mean, you could get a used 8GB 3050 for similar money, and RX 6600s aren't much more, but as I said, that's more effort, more cost, and potentially wasted money. As it is, this card will probably be held back by the i7 in some situations anyway, so a faster card outside of ray tracing scenarios may not give us any more frames per second. In total, I spent £253.54, not too bad for an RTX PC build, even though ray tracing is probably best avoided. How does our cheap and easy machine hold up then? Well, firstly, I'd like to comment on how quiet this thing is. There are a lot of noisy workstations out there, but the Z240 is not one of them. It's advisable to check and replace the thermal paste on the CPU as well, by the way, because it's probably never been changed in its lifespan. That goes for a lot of these machines, but that's pretty much it in terms of maintenance with an old thing like this. Let's get into some gaming results then. In no particular order, we'll be starting with Counter-Strike 2 at 1080p with a medium preset. The only thing I changed was the anti-aliasing, which went from MSAA to off, and the FSR was also off because it defaults to something like quality with the medium preset. Here we saw 130 frames per second on average, with a 1% low of 70 and a 0.1% figure of 44. Keep your eye on the CPU and GPU usage, because as I mentioned before, the CPU is probably holding us back most of the time. If the graphics card is nowhere near 90% or above, then it's probably being held back by the quad-core 7th gen chip. Elden Ring is a good example of this as well, 1080p with a medium preset. We couldn't quite hit the 60 FPS cap here, but I think 56 was quite respectable. Definitely a playable and enjoyable experience on this setup. GTA 5 1080p with the highest settings now, the advanced options were turned off, and we also had FXAA on as opposed to MSAA. The average frame rate was 105, so I think we could have pushed things a little further. The 1% low was 76 and the 0.1% low was 65, so not much else to say here. As expected, this slightly older game is performing quite well on this mix of modern and older system, as I thought it would do. I mean, GTA 5 tends to run fine on a lot of systems these days, and with this modern 6GB 3050 we can get a pretty solid frame rate. The i7 also handles this game just fine with no massive frame dips or drops. Apex Legends up next, very high textures, everything else set to lowest with TSAA enabled. I think in online multiplayer games like this, the higher the frame rate the better, so 152 on average I think was more than playable. The 1% low was 95 and the 0.1% low was 71. I tend to keep the textures on high or very high depending on the VRAM that the card has, and everything else is usually set to lowest because I don't think there's that much difference visually, and in my opinion it's not worth sacrificing the extra frame rate for what is a very slightly better looking game at best in my opinion, but there we go. I'd rather play it like this, but it is entirely up to you, and that is the beauty of PC gaming. On this system though, it runs really nicely. Even Starfield ran with at least 30 frames per second, though it is best suited to DLSS getting involved as well. I mean, we enabled it and set it to balanced here with the lowest in-game settings. Quality DLSS also gave us 30 plus FPS most of the time, but in and around busier cities like Aquila, for example, you're going to see a few heavier dips and drops. I have no doubts that this is in part because of the CPU that we're using as well, 4 cores and 8 threads, though this is a pretty demanding game even with modern graphics cards. It tends to require some form of upscaling with a lot of hardware. Red Dead Redemption 2 up next with the Xbox One X equivalent settings as found by Digital Foundry. I remember watching that video a while ago, very helpful. It's been instrumental to a lot of my testing ever since. I used these options for a plus 60 FPS average, which was quite surprising, but it's nice to see the CPU also holding up in and around busier areas. The 1% low was 54 and the 0.1% low was 51, so a nice smooth and consistent experience for our machine here. When it came to Cyberpunk, I tested with both ray tracing on and off. First of all, we have the medium preset, any form of upscaling off for a surprising 52 FPS. This literally got updated on the day that I recorded these gameplay benchmarks, so perhaps performance has been improved a little bit. I don't remember the 6GB 3050 doing so well at medium settings, but there we go. It may just be me. 52 frames per second with a 1% low of 37 and a 0.1% low of 30, so still a couple of drops here and there, but nothing major. We can also play with ray tracing enabled. The RT Ultra preset and DLSS performance mode gave us 37 FPS, but because of the limited VRAM, 6 gigs, we do see some pretty hefty drops in busier areas, and you can see that most of our VRAM has pretty much been assigned as well, so not a good idea to use ray tracing, especially in these more demanding games. Some games you may get away with it. The 6GB 3050 though, ray tracing is best left off as part of any machine in my opinion. Finally then, it's Fortnite. DX12 mode didn't want to load, or if it did, it would have taken a lot longer than I had the patience for, so I stuck with DX11, 1080p medium preset with 100% res scale. That's the only thing I changed, and I also enabled FXAA. As usual, we have some inconsistencies with the percentile figures, but overall, the gameplay experience was pretty decent for our system here. But that just about does it. Now, it may not be a pairing that many of you would think of combining, but the 3050 6GB isn't exactly the most powerful card in the world, and the i7 7700 still holds up in a lot of scenarios. So I think if you want to make the most of an old office machine, something like an HP Z240 here, then this is going to be the best way to do that, to ensure you're getting the most gaming power from it. We could also upgrade the RAM, though it's not going to make much of a difference here, and a larger SSD wouldn't go amiss either for storing plenty of games. If you want to save a bit more money, then you could purchase perhaps a used 1650 instead. Plus, there's also an option to replace the PSU and get an adapter. But like I said, you may be wasting your money if you want to go with a more powerful card, because this i7 is only going to get you so far in 2024. But this has been my cheap £250 PC build. Let me know what you think down below. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.